Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. We are back with our consulting and publishing company, Tony Marolt, the man in charge, and of course, the owner, chief leader, and president of the company. And it's called Lead Left, Grow Right. It's leadleftgrowright.com. And he's here talking about leadership, problem solving, you name it, he does it. And he's helping businesses and individuals all over the world with his techniques. He's also an author and dear friend of the show. Welcome here. How are you today?
I'm doing terrific, Jill.
Great. For those new listeners out there, just a little more about you and what you're doing. And of course, we're going to get to a good conversation today, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked in the private sector for over 25 years at a Fortune 500 company, doing a variety of roles and throughout the supply chain, from distribution through quality engineering, and spent the last 10 years in technology implementing a huge monster ERP program, which is rip and replace your entire guts of your computer system that's probably from the 1960s. So
yep.
prior to that, I served 9 years in the Navy and got to teach at the Naval Academy, my alma mater. And so I've always wanted to write a book, and over the years, I have put together little note cards that let me know whether I do something right or wrong, little quotes to myself, or about others' behaviors that I observed, either good or bad leadership traits. And I put them into a book called The Leadership Quotient. And we have been talking about that for probably about the first 9 sessions of the show. And we're kind of exploring some other topics beyond the book. You can always reach me at tony.marolt@gmail.com or 816-694-4656, or contact me through my website, leadleftgrowright.com, and use the contact form, and it'll shoot an email right over to me.
Beautiful.
So
speaking
today,
of emails, I know we're going to talk about what happens when you get tired of leading. Thank you.
So I think today, if we addressed that subject last. So today's topic should be, for the 28th year, leadership developmental experiments and accountability. So maybe we could recap
a little bit from us being tired of leading. Yes, got it.
Exactly. So what happens? We talked almost the entire time about this, and just wanted to cover at a very high level some of the key points, really more questions that should be asked. If you are, when we say tired of leading, it could literally be physically and mentally tired, or it could be that you're assigned to a different project, and so you need to pass on some of your leadership responsibilities to someone else. Ultimately, you still have the accountability, but it's a great opportunity to grow other leaders. So some of the things that we talked about is really, how do you identify whether you're tired, and what kind of symptoms there might be, and what are some signs that might appear either physically or mentally that you're tired of leading. And then, so once you've identified that there's this need, then there's a desire to find, okay, well, who can I give some more leadership experience to? And depending on how your development of leaders has been, you might have a very strong pipeline, or it might be smaller. But in any case, you have to identify the right person. So that's a question. Who am I going to pass on some of these responsibilities to? Mm-hmm. What does a transition? So this is usually a temporary thing. So you're passing on some of these responsibilities to someone else, and usually it's like I said, a more temporary thing. So what is the process for how you pass on those responsibilities? And it could be even an instance where you're passing a couple of different responsibilities on to a couple of different people. So you need to sit down and have a conversation with them, and make sure that they're on the same page as you as to what's going on with the particular area of your leadership that they're going to take over. And then kind of define, okay, so when it's time to return the responsibilities to me, a great example is I'm done coming off of this big project X, what does that look like? Because in both cases, you want to make sure that the transition is as smooth as possible for that individual and for your teams. So, and the last thing is really, how do you determine when's the right time to take the reins back? So in a nutshell, that's what we talked about. Yeah. So those are some questions to think about when it comes time for you to do that. So.
Right. And for today now, leadership, developmental experiments and accountability is where you want to start. So for example, how would you describe personal development specifically?
So I think there's at least two major areas. The first would be in hard skills. So what are it could be technical skills, for instance, programming skills, or learning how to run manufacturing presses, or those kinds of things. It can be hard skills like that, or the opposite of that, or the counter. And ideally, this is something that has a symbiotic relationship within each individual, is the soft skills, communication. How do you communicate with people? It could be how do you influence people? How do you affect a strategic vision, and what does that look like, etc. So I think those are the two primary areas. And then the other part of personal development that I always like to say is it's really about stretching an individual. So that could be hard skills, soft skills, or both. But in either case, if you're developing them, you're wanting to stretch them. Sometimes it's for something new. Hey, you haven't done this before, so I want to stretch you in this area. It could be learning about, let's say you're in distribution and you want to learn about manufacturing. So it could be a stretch assignment with something along those lines. Or it could be, hey, we've had this discussion in the past, Tony, and one of the things that you and I have talked about is you have pretty good communication skills, but how can we enhance that so you'll be even more effective as a communicator? So, so both of those situations are kind of at the individual personal development level.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And just a reminder, leadleftgrowright.com. Tony Marolt here joining us. Leadership Quotient is the name of the book. And just love to point that out more than once during the show, because you never know who's tuning in and they're like,
That's right.
Wait, what is he talking about? What is this development stuff? What is team development, to be specific?
So there's, you can develop individuals on a team. It could be your peers. It could be people that work for you on a team, or it can be the entire team. So you may say, okay, we know we've got a project coming up, and we need to have everybody on our team. We need skill A, skill B, skill D, and skill Z, but we're kind of lacking in skill A and Z. So as a team, how can we get that better? So that might look like, okay, well, we know as a team we're not really that good at documenting the right kinds of things. So you might choose that as a developmental item for the team. So this is something where everybody would participate in it, as opposed to an individual. And so as a team, you might be trying to get them focused on a particular area, or maybe as a team, they just need to improve generally, maybe how they work with each other. That could be something that you're working on. So it doesn't have to be project-based. It can just be on an ongoing basis. It could be developing better trust within the team, or better trust between the team and you, and vice versa. So the team development is a little more expansive in that if you're dealing with a personal development, usually you're not throwing in 20 different things. As a matter of fact, that would be stupid to do that, because people can't tackle more than a couple of things at one time. We're just not built that way. But with a team now you've got multiple personalities, multiple hard and soft skills. So there's either interdependencies, or you want to create interdependencies, but it's a little more complex when you're developing the team as a whole. And Another thing to consider, depending on how long people have been working on that team, or depending on what you're trying to do with that team, is you might also, at the same time, concurrently say, well, Tony and Jill, I'm working with you on this because you're trying to move higher in your career. So we've been developing that, but I don't want you to forget about that while we're doing this team development.
Yeah.
So you can do both simultaneously. You don't have to, but you certainly could do that if you wanted to.
Got it. Good to know. All right. And talking about accountability, we got to talk about leadership and, of course, passing on that torch. There's so much to get to. And also, sorry, I messed up there. It should be, what's the critical person on your team? But I did get your notes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
looked down quick because I don't want to look down too much because it looks bad.
Yeah. No,
my apologies. I'm like, wait, that's not it.
But that's real life. We've had technical glitches before, and
oh my
this
gosh.
is a communications glitch. So that's just part of, and frankly, that's a part of leadership, right?
Yeah.
You just have to go with the flow and
right. Because I could have went like this.
Yeah.
But like I look quick and I'm like, oh shoot, I got to scroll down. We talked about that before. All right, so where are we? We're talking the critical person.
We're talking
individual
about
assessment. Yep.
Yeah, what are those kinds of things that are critical, either to the individual or the team, as you're, I call them leadership experiments. You could say exercises. You could say scenarios. There's a lot of different words, but the bottom line is you're trying to get people to either stretch with something new, or you're trying to improve an area that they may need some improvement, or they may not necessarily need improvement from your perspective, but they want to improve that themselves. So they want to bring it forward to you. So in terms of criticality, a key understanding is that if you're not growing, you're standing still. And if you stand still, life is going to pass you by. So I sometimes use the analogy of a river, and we are going through, and have been for many, many years, but modern humans, the pace of technology, communication, what we're able to do from just new things that are in the work environment, those are going at a torrid pace. And most of us are like, oh, I can't juggle 55 balls at the same time. But I always say, you have two choices. If a river's running by and you're standing on the bank of the river, you can either stand there and watch the river run by you, or you can jump in and try to swim along. So swimming along means you've got to develop, or you're not going to be able to handle the next new email system, or you're not going to be able to handle the next new procurement system that's there, whatever it might be, or an HR edict that comes down. So that's a really important thing, is to understand everyone has to grow. For just people are very few of us are such that we don't want to learn new things. The level may increase or decrease depending on the individual, but everyone wants to learn. There's very few humans that are walking around saying, nope, don't want to learn anything new. I'm just going to sit at home and or sit at work and just not do anything. So can't do that. And then it's sort of like muscles, right? If you don't work out, and I have a strong need to do some working out here, particularly as I get older. The only way to retain muscle mass when you're getting older is you've got to work with heavy weights and stuff. Well, the same thing happens with leadership skills and hard skills or soft skills within that larger umbrella. Is if you don't work those muscles, they're going to atrophy and die, and then you will not be able to compete, and quite frankly, you will not be effective at your job. You could become disillusioned, all those things. So if you think about it as a strength training exercise, you're either trying to work a new muscle. So let's say you want to get your biceps a little stronger. Okay, work on the biceps. Or you say, my legs are pretty strong, but I'd like to get them, even a little bit more. So it can be continual improvement, or it can be a switch to a whole new muscle group. So if I don't know if those are helpful to everyone, but they're helpful to me, and hope you will as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. LeadLeftGrowRight.com. Tony Marolt.
Yep.
Plug. And phone number for you, because we are halfway through. Best forms of contact.
816-694-4656.
Awesome. Continue, please, darling.
So the next thing, we kind of talked about personal development, team development, and why it's critical. So if you start from that position and you go with my assumption that you have to grow to get better, right? Then the first thing you really need to do before you start either your own personal development or development of an individual or your entire team is you have to do an assessment. You can't just, I've had some managers that have been outstanding and worked with me and put their opinion along with mine, and we agree on some development goals. I've had other managers that will just put something down just because the performance review process says put something down. So, I might say, Tony, you need to learn to type at 120 words per minute. And I'm like, why? That's not my job. I have a really decent typing skill. I'm good at keyboarding. Well, it doesn't matter. We have to have something down for the performance review so we can say we're developing you. Well, develop people in an area that is going to be helpful to them, not just a random. So in order to do that, you've got to do this assessment. So you can conduct a self-assessment, and I think that's the first thing you really need to do is, what do I think are things I either am, need to work on stronger or be improved, or do I have to find other people because I don't find myself as objective as I need to be? And I recommend doing the self-assessment first, and then going to at least one or two other people, some confidants that and say, so help me out here. These are the things I've identified. Do you agree with that? I think my public speaking skills are not very good. And they may say, no, I think you're an outstanding public speaker. You always get your points across. Or they may say, no, I agree with you, Tony. There's a lot of times when you're up there giving a presentation and you're walking all over the floor, and you walk away from the mic and stuff like that. So it helps to have that corroborating feedback for assessment. And then you have to take a look at short-term versus long-term goals. There might be something that you just need, real quick. Or there may be something that says, no, this is going to be a longer, slower process. It's a more complex skill to learn. So take a look at short-term versus long-term. And then you have to account for people's time. And that's where, particularly if you're leading a group, you should know those individuals and what kinds of workload that they're under, so that you don't assign, like I said before, 15 different objectives for them to develop in. You want to be able to give them a couple that you and they mutually agree, this is what the development plan is going to be. And you may say, I know starting in July, you're on this much bigger project, or you're working with the HR group to do some assessment. So let's back off on that. And let's say for this particular objective, I know you're going to be working really hard with them, July, August, and September. So let's make this due by the end of the year. Whereas another person, you may say, well, they're going to kind of be steady state, so they should have time. So you may say, well, let's have this accomplished. Let's set a target for August, because you're sensitive to people's workloads, and you don't want to overwhelm them. But that also doesn't mean that you get away with not developing them. Say, well, everyone's busy. Well, of course, everyone's always busy, but you have to make time. If you believe that growing is important, then you have to make time for developing those individuals.
Got it. Thank you so much. Also, don't want to forget, we have 6 minutes left in the show. Want to make sure we finish covering everything we can for the leadership developmental experiments and accountability. And then we'll talk about our upcoming stuff. So how do we want to kind of sum up this agenda? There's still a few more bullet points.
So I think that the two main points that I would like to talk about and leave you with is we talked about what's important with personal development, how do you know, conducting this assessment. So once you've conducted the assessment, now it's time to start planning the exercise, the experiment. So you have to say, okay, what are some parameters that we're going to use to either keep each other honest about this, or you know, things like communication. How are you going to communicate? Is it once a week? Is it once a month? Is it written? Is it a individual meeting with someone? You got to figure out what you're trying to really measure and grow. And you have to be a little more prescriptive on this. Some people will just set a very broad goal, but you should be able to tighten that thing down. And then what's the, you know, the WIFM, if people have heard of that, WIIFM, what's in it for me for the experiment? But really it should be, instead of me, what's in it for us? What are we going to gain out of that? Myself as the official leader of the group, and you as the individual. There has to be some mutual agreement on what you're getting out of that. And then talk about what measure, how we're going to measure this, whether it's successful or not. And sometimes leadership experiments aren't successful. Someone jumps into a role and they are not good at it. Well, you learn just as much from that as if they had succeeded at it. So again, details, how are you going to share those back and forth? This is about you and the individual, or you and the team, understanding the parameters so everyone's on the same page. And then after everything has been completed, let's say it's now August and you're talking with the individual B that I was talking about before, then you have to kind of debrief it either with them or with the team and say, okay, now that we've gone through this process and you guys have done a really good job, we complied with our parameters, or let's see if we complied with our parameters. Review, the first thing you do is review why you did that in the first place to make sure everyone refreshes their memory. Then you get feedback from individuals or peers, and some of that you should set up ahead of time because that's a measuring mechanism. And then, as I said before, focus on the results, either good or bad. But the important thing is if the result was not what you both desired, then, as I say in a book, fail forward. Let's say together, what did we learn from that? And the manager may have learned something as well, and the individual or team might have. So if it's appropriate, in some cases you want to talk about, particularly if it's you're trying to stretch them in a new area, talk about how that factors into their long-term career goals. You know, if they were very successful, you say, well, yeah, I think maybe you have a penchant for marketing, you know, or something like that. So that's kind of the essence of these leadership experiments. And, you know, the important thing is to understand what development is, set up the parameters, and then conduct the experiment, and then measure and debrief that, and make sure that people are held accountable within that whole time frame.
Beautiful. I love the insight. Tony Marolt here, Lead Left, Grow Right. Also, coming up, you know, we're going to have some other topics in the future. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more? Maybe some of the leadership challenges that we face?
That I think you picked exactly the one I was thinking about, because I gave you several on the list. But I think, you know, as I mentioned, life is getting more and more complicated. So let's take a look maybe next time about leadership challenges across generations, ethnic cultures, the corporate culture itself. You know, IBM is very different from Siemens, for instance. So let's talk and look at some of those different parameters that are out there and challenges, and maybe we can come up with some solutions. I don't know, but let's at least explore what those challenges are.
Perfect. And also talk about maybe professional leadership traits and how, you know, one from the other changes. And let me ask you, you mentioned IBM specifically in Siemens. Can you give me an example quick? Because you hooked me. Tell me how does one lead compare? Yeah.
So IBM for years, and I haven't been in the soup enough to know exactly how it is today, but for years, their reputation was much more buttoned up, more fact-based computer programmers, engineers. Those were people that were highly valued. They all wore suits at one time. suits and ties, and so as opposed to maybe instead of seeing as, let's say, Disney, where creativity is more important, and what kinds of values do they have behind that drive them. So at IBM, if wearing a suit's important, at Disney it might be for particularly if you're working with guests and stuff, is, are you smiling? Can you get along with people? Do you have ideas on how we can make Mickey Mouse more appealing, etc.? All those things. So the cultures are going to be very different than between that, and you'll find that really within every company. And sometimes it's hard before you get hired to find out what is the real culture.
Yeah. How do you find that? Right? What do you search people on LinkedIn and ask them? I know you got to tell me the proper etiquette there, because I wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah, that's those are a little bit different to try and figure that out. I think a lot of that is upon you as the interviewee when you're aspiring for a job. There, to ask the right kinds of questions.
Ask the questions. Yes.
Ask the questions.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right, we'll do.
Okay.
Tony Marolt, again, leadleftgrowright.com. His book, The Leadership Quotient, we can find that where?
On Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
Awesome. And your phone number one more time?
816-694-4656.
Tony, love speaking with you. Thank you so much. And
thank
really,
you, Jill.
Really good seeing you as always. Have a great day. And
all
to
right.
all of our listeners, thank you. We appreciate you too. Have a great day and stay tuned. More of the show's on the way.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.